Hello and welcome to Presenting with Power Part 1. Today we'll be discussing the P in power. Now I want you to imagine for a minute that you're sitting in the front row of a large IT conference, about 1,000 people in attendance. And as the conference organizer makes his way to the stage and reaches for the microphone, he introduces you to the stage as the keynote speaker. The catch is you don't have any public speaking experience and you've never been in front of a crowd this large before in your entire life. That was me about 20 years ago. And as I was sitting there waiting for the keynote speaker to introduce me, I was going through what I was going to say in my head. I had my PowerPoint presentation tucked under my arm in my laptop and was ready to deliver a killer presentation. The problem was I didn't have any practice. And as I walked up to the stage, I turned around to look at the audience and they were all staring right at me. You see, what had happened is a couple of months previous, the company I was working for at the time, a startup IT company, had paid to sponsor this large corporate event. And at this large corporate event, we were given the keynote spot. Our CEO volunteered me to do the keynote presentation, and then we began working on exactly what I was going to say and exactly what I was going to do. We had spent months delivering a killer slide deck. We thought about all the points we were going to cover, everything we wanted to talk about, and we were ready. Until I got up on stage and everybody was staring right at me. And I freaked out. I actually forgot everything I was going to say. I didn't know where to start. I even forgot that I had PowerPoint slides with me. So once I took a deep breath and kind of composed myself, thinking in the back of my head, oh my gosh, what have you gotten yourself into? I felt the blood rushing to my face. My ears started to get hot. I could feel the butterflies in my stomach. I kind of fumbled to plug my computer into the projector, and all I could hear in the room was silence. Not a single word. And I thought to myself, what was I going to say again? Oh, that's right. I have a joke. And so I stumbled through my joke. And once I delivered the punchline, again, silence. Not a single noise in the entire auditorium. And it just got worse and worse. So thinking quickly that perhaps the audience didn't understand the punchline, I delivered it again to silence. And then I remembered that I had a PowerPoint deck. I turned on my computer that I had previously plugged in, and I delivered my entire presentation with my back to the audience, reading word for word off each and every PowerPoint slide. And it was horrendous. In fact, I delivered my 45-minute keynote in about 15 minutes. And as I turned back around to look at the audience, they were all still staring at me. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. And the thing that I've come to realize now, after giving thousands of presentations all over the world to crowds much larger than that, is that what we had done and what we had worked on as a company is we had worked on content. We had worked on our messaging. We had worked on what we were going to say. Our slides at the time were nicely designed, and we were ready to deliver something. What we hadn't worked on was my mindset. What we hadn't worked on is what it was going to be like when I actually turned around and looked at that audience and saw them all staring at me. So what I've done is I've created a methodology that I call POWER, and today we're going to be talking about presenting with power, specifically the P in power. Now, it takes a lot to deliver a killer presentation. It takes much more than content. It takes more than mindset. It takes a variety of skills and a variety of talents. And so what I want to do as we go through this series is I just want to share with you some top insights from each of the categories. As we look at power, we'll start with P for presence. Now, presence means a lot of things to a lot of people, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Let me first just go through the rest of the letters in power. O stands for own it. And what I mean there is owning your stories. Those are the things you tell yourself. And owning your story, which is the thing that you tell others. W stands for, what is your purpose? Why is it that you're standing in front of a group anyway? What is it that you're trying to convey? And what is it that motivates you to want to convey that message? E stands for evolve your thinking, where we'll start to put into practice some of the things that we've learned through previous sessions. And you'll have an opportunity to really see how this all fits together, and how when you start to think differently, that your presentation skills will come on by leaps and bounds. Whether you're a novice or whether you've done thousands of presentations, you'll find a new way to look at things. And then R, reimagine yourself. And that's reimagining yourself as a powerful presenter. And the two, evolve your thinking and reimagine yourself, go hand in hand as to what it is that you're trying to get across to your audience, and how are you going to impact your audience whenever you have the opportunity. So let's get started with presence. Now, I ask this question a lot of my clients. What do you think presence is? And I'll hear things like, that's the ability to command a room, or that's another word for charisma, or that's how somebody handles themselves when they're in front of an audience. And I would tend to agree that yes, that's all of those things. Presence is also an inherent way that we act and behave. And people can sense our presence, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or whether you're standing on stage in front of thousands. And so what I want to do is I want to show you just an example of what I think about presence. And I tend to find my examples in kind of strange ways. So here is a video from a guy called Yannick Sanguin, who is the music director at the New York Met. And so what they've done in this clip is they've turned the camera on Yannick as he's directing a piece from Strauss. And I just think it's amazing as you watch him and watch what he's doing as he's working with the orchestra. So let's have a look at Yannick. Now, I like to use that as an example because I think it is just a fantastic display of presence. Because for Yannick, sitting in the orchestra pit with his back to the audience, his job is to get the orchestra excited about what they're playing. And then in turn, the orchestra gets the audience excited about what they're hearing. And so as we start to develop our presence, and as we start to let our presence flow through every part of our lives, then all of a sudden we start to look at things a little bit differently. And as I said, much like Yannick, our job whenever we have an opportunity to stand up on a stage facing an audience is to have an impact on that audience. And so how do we do that with our presence? Now, as we look at presence, I want to look at three areas of presence. I want to look at presence of mind, I want to look at presence of body, and presence of voice. And we'll start with presence of mind. And now, when we look at presence of mind, I like acronyms, so you'll see lots of acronyms through the things that I'm talking about. So as we look at presence of mind, we're going to look at four areas. We're going to look at our mindset. We're going to look at inclusion or rapport with your audience. We're going to look at managing our nerves. And we're going to look at our delivery. So we start with our mindset. Now, I have quite a few friends who are very advanced skiers, and I've had this conversation with quite a few of them, and with other sportsmen in other sports. And For those of you that are skiers, let's say you're at the top of a mountain, you've got all your ski gear on, and you're getting ready to go down your first advanced run. And as you're getting ready to go down that advanced run, you look down the mountain and you see all sorts of trees and maybe some rocks and maybe some cliff edges and all sorts of things that are on either side of your run. And typically what you'll do is you look down your run and you'll decide which way you're going to go. And as you head down the run, you keep your mind focused on your line and not on the obstacles. And this is really important when we are delivering any kind of speech or any kind of talk to any group, is to make sure that we focus on our line. Because if we start focusing on the obstacles, then all of a sudden we start to get worried about those obstacles, and we then start to move in the direction of those obstacles. Now, scientists tell us that we can't necessarily process negatives. So the old example is, if I tell you, don't think of a blue elephant, you have to think of a blue elephant in order not to think of a blue elephant. So in order to conceptualize something you're not supposed to think of, you got to put a picture of that thing in your head first. And so with mindset, with skiing, it's the same thing. If you're going to focus on the trees or the obstacles, you're going to move in the direction of the obstacles. So let me give you a practical example. When I used to work in live television and I was a boxing ring announcer, and oftentimes I would be in a very large auditorium, might be a Sheffield Arena, O2 Arena, something like that, and there might be thousands of people in attendance. And the thousands of people were kind of peripheral to me, because what was also in the ring was a cameraman that was standing about 4 or 5 feet in front of me. And my job was to deliver my piece straight down the barrel of the camera. And it's difficult because there's no real-time feedback. I mean, the audience is there and I say things and they cheer, and that's a bit of feedback, but there's no, like when you're having a conversation and you can see the expression on people's face. You say something funny and they smile, and that's good feedback. Or, you tell them a personal story and you can see that they're empathizing with you in your eyes, and you get that feedback. But delivering to a camera, you really don't. And so what I used to do is I would stand in the middle of the ring or the middle of the arena or wherever I happened to be. I would be looking down the barrel of the camera, and going through my mind was, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up. Whatever you do, live TV, hundreds of thousands of people watching, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up. And guess what happened? I screwed up more times than not. And because my mindset was in the wrong place, because I was focused on the obstacles. And the more I focused on the obstacles, then the more I moved towards the obstacles. So I'd mispronounce names. I would sometimes I would call the wrong information. I was even hosting snooker on ITV, and I called Ronnie O'Sullivan into the ring because I was focused on the obstacles. So as we start to focus on different things, ultimately I kind of had this epiphany, and I thought, because I'm focusing on the obstacles, I'm moving towards the obstacles. So then I changed my self-talk, and we'll come on to that when we get to the O section of this series. But I changed my self-talk, and instead of saying, don't screw up, don't screw up, I used to say, oh, I can't wait for this. You're going to smash this. This is going to be brilliant. Oh, isn't this great? You've got all these people here. You've got live TV. You've got a great audience, and you have an ability now to impact all of these people at the same time. And once I changed my mindset, I stopped making the mistakes. And so as we translate that to public speaking, as we translate that to standing on the stage, looking out at our audience, instead of, like me, at the very first time I ever delivered a speech, thinking everybody's looking at me and freaking out in my head, if we start to think, I can't wait to share what I have to share, then that whole thing will just give us a very, very different impact. So the M in mind stands for mindset. Next is inclusion or rapport. Now, I talk about inclusion and rapport, and I go much deeper in this in some of my workshops, but how do you make sure that your entire audience is included in the things that you say? And how do you make sure that your entire audience feels what you feel? A great quote here from Maya Angelou: people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And if you put yourself in that frame as you're thinking about delivering a talk, as you're thinking about writing a talk, how are people going to feel at the end of my talk? All of a sudden, your perspective changes a bit, and there's another shift, and you start thinking about how you can leave lasting impressions. Now, a couple of things here with rapport that I talk about is when you have an audience and you're getting ready to deliver something, no matter how big or small, different people process information in different ways. Now, there's been lots and lots of studies about how people learn, how people process information, how people take in information, and essentially, people take in information through their senses. So, people will either be very visually orientated, in that they make lots of pictures in their heads. They like to see pictures. You can hear it in their words when they might say, "Do you see what I mean?" People are auditorial orientated, which means they live life through their ears. Do you hear what I'm saying? And they like to hear things and like to make sure that that the things that they're hearing go into their mind, and they maybe not so much build pictures, but they work more in sounds. And then there's a third main characteristic called kinesthetic, and these are people that live their lives through their feelings, and they like the way that things make them feel. So they might make buying decisions, for instance, based on the fact that whether or not it feels right. And so as we look at these three main, and then there's people that you can take in information through your sense of taste and through your sense of smell, but we'll come back to those two in a couple minutes. But the three main ones, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, it's really important as you approach a crowd, as you begin a speech, as you begin a talk, that you build rapport with everybody in your audience. So much like I did with my story at the beginning when I talked about what it was like when I was sitting in the front row, I told you how I was feeling. I told you that my face was hot and my ears got hot and there was butterflies in my stomach. I told you that I was nervous. I told you what I saw when I turned around and everybody was staring at me. And I described that picture to you. I also told you what I heard when I walked up to the stage and there was dead silence. And I delivered my joke. And again, there was silence. And then when I delivered the punchline a second time, there was silence. So what I had done with that short introduction is I had made sure that all of the three different types of learners were all engaged and I had built rapport with them. I've said to the visual learners, as I turned around, here's what I saw. So come with me, I'm going to tell you a story. I said to the auditory learners, as I made my way to the stage and turned around, everybody was looking at me, and it was dead silence. So those of you who are auditory learners, come with me, I'm going to tell you a story. And then finally, I told you that there's butterflies in my stomach. I told you that I could feel my face getting red and my ears getting hot. And so I could tell you how I feel. So all of the kinesthetic people, come with me, I'm going to tell you a story. And so as we start to build rapport with our audience, we want to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. Because if I happen to know that I'm very visually orientated, and if I just deliver a talk that's entirely visual in its construction, in its language, in its tools, and everything that I'm saying, then I know that the auditory and kinesthetic people aren't going to get the full feeling or the full sound or the full idea of my presentation. So I want to make sure that I bring everybody together. The I in mind is inclusion. Now let's talk about nerves. So nerves is an interesting thing, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, I just can't possibly do public speaking because I just get so nervous and I worry so much about the crowd." And the thing is, when we have nerves about things like that, I mean, you know, some people say, "Oh yeah, a certain amount of nerves are good," and I still get nervous when I do things, but it's more of a constructive energy than it is a paranoid nervousness. So let me show you what I mean. So much like how we learn, we also take in information through our senses. We see things, we hear things, we feel things, we taste things, and we smell things. And so we take in all of this information in all sorts of different ways. And so whatever happens outside of our heads is what I call an external event. So an external event happens, we take that external event into our head, and we actually start to change it. We change it based on a number of things. But the one thing to be sure is that nothing that we've constructed in our head is actually what's happened. Because you see, what we do is we tend to delete, distort, and generalize information. And so let me tell you what I mean by that. So we tend to delete information, and it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes we might delete a conversation or some words that somebody said we didn't like, and then we have an argument because we've deleted something, and that's not so much a good thing. But we also delete things to sort of protect ourselves. Again, science has told us that we can remember or we can concentrate or focus on about 7 things at any given time, plus or minus 2. Now, more recent studies have told us that it's actually much less than that. It might be 2, 3, or 4 things that we can focus on at any given time. And so we tend to delete lots and lots of information because if we had to keep track of that information, our heads would explode. So, for instance, if I asked you what color is the wall behind your head right now, you might not have that in your awareness because it's information you've deleted. Or how does the floor feel under your foot? Or how's your left ear feeling about now? Or any of those things. I bring them into your awareness, and all of a sudden you start to think about them. But if I don't bring them into your awareness, you've just deleted the information because it's really not relevant to your experience at the moment. It's not relevant to what you're doing, not relevant to what you're learning. And that's okay. Now, the second thing that we do is we tend to distort information. Now, we distort information in all sorts of different ways. Again, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Let's say that you sent me a text and you said, "Hey, Bret, I really want to talk to you. It's really important. Can you have a call?" And let's say I didn't answer that text. Let's say an hour goes by, hour and a half goes by, still didn't hear anything from me. You pick up your phone and you can tell from the color of the message that I had actually read it. And so you send me another one. "Hey, Bret, really need to talk to you. Are you available?" Again, I don't respond. I don't respond. I don't respond. Maybe you call me. I don't answer. And then maybe the next day you're thinking, "God, Bret, he just completely ignored me. He's probably mad at me for something." And we totally distort the entire situation because perhaps I've lost my phone, or perhaps I've been in a meeting, or perhaps I did read your message and I was going to get to you as soon as I pulled over and I forgot, or any number of things. But we tend to jump to conclusions. We tend to distort information all the time. I distorted that information when I got up in front of the group and I turned around and everybody was staring at me. All of a sudden, I thought that everybody was judging me. They may or may not have been, but mostly people were rooting for me. Most of the time, when you get on a stage and you're talking to people, the audience is rooting for you. They're there because they're interested in what you have to say. But we tend to distort that, and it comes out in our nerves. And then finally, generalizing. And again, generalizing is a good thing and a bad thing. The classic, "Oh, mom, everybody else is doing it," or "everybody else has one," and so we generalize, saying everybody else has one, so I must have one. Everybody's doing it, whatever the case may be. We also generalize in a good way. So, for instance, let's say when I was, I don't know, 3 years old, I learned how to open a door. That means I can probably open any door you put in front of me because I've generalized that learning experience. And as I start to generalize learning experiences in my life, then I become much more adept at not having to think about those things that have become routine. As you speak more and more and more on stage, ultimately you generalize those learning experiences, and you continue to improve, and you continue to pick up tips and tricks and new things from the people you meet and the people you talk to. But as you start to generalize that learning experience, then that's where it informs your presence, and all of a sudden your presence starts to change. So these things all work together. Now, how do we decide what we're going to delete, what we're going to distort, and what we're going to generalize? You see, we all have different ideas in our heads. We all have different beliefs and values. We all have different thoughts. We all have different definitions of language. For instance, again, the classic is define love, and how many different ways are people going to define love? For anybody who speaks a second language or a third or a fourth or a fifth language, any other language, what is the world like when you're thinking in that language? You experience it very differently because the language brings with it all sorts of connotations, all sorts of generalizations of its own. And so we tend to change things based on language thoughts. Again, history and events. What have you gone through in your life? I say all the time, I went to school in California, in the United States. My school experience is very different from many of the students I work with here at the UK. So as I'm working with students in schools, and maybe they're 16 or 17 years old, 16 or 17-year-old boys in the United Kingdom have a very, very different school experience than 16 or 17-year-old boys in the US. Um, this informs our observations, the things we see, the things we've been exposed to, the things that are in our head already, and then of course our circumstances. I'll give you a great example here of circumstances. I overheard a conversation at the gym today, and one of the guys walked in and said to the girl at the desk, she says, "Oh, how was your weekend?" She says, "Oh, it was pretty good. I didn't have to be here. How was yours?" He said, "Oh, it was really great. I was here twice." And so their circumstances changes because the girl behind the desk, it's her job. The guy that's coming to the gym, it's his relaxation. So our circumstances can change our perspective quite a bit. And then ultimately, what we derive from all of this is we create an internal picture of what's gone on. So there's an external event. We run it through all these filters and we build an internal picture. As I said, the external event is you sent Bret a text. He didn't respond to you. Your internal picture is that Bret's mad at you. And you see how easy it is to distort information. And so as we're communicating with others, as we're communicating from the stage, first of all, it's our responsibility to ensure the audience has the appropriate internal representation. But also, it's important that we build the appropriate internal representation about what we're doing. And so, all of our feelings, all of our emotions, everything that we have within us doesn't have any meaning until we actually give it a label. So, again, let me explain what I mean. So, let's say that I tell you I'm going to explain a way that you're feeling at the moment. Now your stomach, you've got butterflies in your stomach, and maybe your palms are a bit sweaty, maybe a bit sweaty your brow, and you're breathing a bit heavy, your breath's a bit short, and you can feel your heart beating a bit faster than it normally does. And if I asked you, what emotion are you feeling? Most people would say, oh, I'm nervous or anxiety or I'm stressed or something like that, because they've labeled it that way, right? But let's pretend that you haven't seen your partner in 2 months, and they've been away on a business trip, and they're arriving at Heathrow, and you're standing in the arrivals hall, and you know that they're going to come through the door any minute. And if you explain your physiology to me, I'll bet you'll have butterflies in your stomach. I'll bet your palms would be a bit sweaty. You'd be a bit short of breath. Your heart would be beating a bit faster. You might even have some sweat on your brow. It's the exact same physical feeling. You have just decided in your mind that you're going to label it differently. So in this case, it might be excitement or anticipation rather than being nervous or having anxiety. And so the thing is, we can control how we process information and the internal representations we make, because ultimately these internal representations control our behavior. They control the way we look. They control the way we stand. They control our physiology. So people can tell if you're nervous or if you're upset just by looking at you. They control the way we use our language. They control the words. They control everything about us. So if we can get a handle on this, then all of a sudden we can start to get a handle on our nerves. And so I'll give you a really quick exercise and a really quick way that you can alter or change what's going on. So the next time you get ready to speak, or the next time you get ready to do something that makes you nervous, just take a minute, take a deep breath, and then I want you to look around and find 5 things that you can see and number them. Number 1, I can see my computer. Number 2, I can see the clock on the wall. Number 3, I can see the door. Number 4, I can see a desk. Number 5, I can see my mobile phone. Then take another deep breath and then find 4 things that you can hear. Oh, I can hear the clock ticking on the wall. I can hear the mumble of the crowd. I can hear somebody shuffling papers. Find 4 things and just call them out in your mind. And then find 3 things that you can touch. Oh, I can touch the lectern, I can touch the microphone, I can touch my right thigh. And what we're doing here is we're going through each and every one of your senses. As we go through what you can see, what you can feel, what you can hear, 2 things that you might be able to smell, might be your own cologne or the perfume of somebody else, or maybe just the ambient smell of the room. And then one final deep breath, and then go inside and find one new emotion that you're feeling. And it will be anything other than anxiety, because what we've done is we've engaged all of your other senses. We've engaged your mind, and it's a little sort of mindfulness practice that you can use the next time you have to do something that makes you nervous. And trust me, when you get in the habit of doing that, you'll be anything but nervous before you tackle whatever your task happens to be. So that's the end in mind, is nerves. And now let's move on to delivery. Now delivery is an interesting thing, because there are lots and lots and lots of different ways to deliver information. And we're going to come on to loads of different ways in a couple of minutes. But really what I want to talk about here is I want to talk about, how do you deliver? How do you come across? How do you do what you do? And I've got another video here to show you. And this is a girl called Rebecca, who won the United States National Spelling Bee. And it was in sort of the mid-90s, so the video quality isn't great. But I just want you to watch her delivery.
Euonym. Is what you meaning good?
Yes.
Is what on a meaning name?
Yes.
Euonym!
She still has to spell it.
E! U! O! N! Y! M-U-M!
That's correct.
Rebecca Sealfond. Rebecca
Pleased to
Sealfond.
present the 1997 National Spelling Bee champion,
Katie Kerwin
representing
is-
the New York Daily News, Rebecca Sealfond.
So Rebecca in that clip was excited as she could possibly be in that delivery. And the reason that she was excited is because she knew her topic. She was at the finals of the US Spelling Bee, and they gave her a word that she knew. And she knew she was going to win. She knew she was going to smash it. And all of a sudden, all of that emotion just came out. And absolute brilliant delivery there. And when we're on stage and we're looking out across an audience that's looking back at us, how excited do you get? Because you have an opportunity to impact, to influence all of those people sitting there as they're looking at you. And the more excited we get, the more passionate we are about the things that we are delivering, the more we help our audience feel what we're talking about. Again, remember the Maya Angelou quote: people forget what you said, people forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And the way we make people feel often comes from our own passion about our topic. So D in mind, delivery. Now let's move on to presence of body. Now, I'm going to touch on stagecraft here a little bit, and there are loads and loads of different ways to manage yourself on stage, but I just want to give you a couple. I think presence of body obviously goes hand in hand with presence of mind. So as we look at body, I'm going to use the acronym this time, STAGE. And as I use the acronym STAGE, as we move through these letters, I just want to give you a couple of tips and tricks about how you can do things a little bit differently. So let's talk with how you move on stage. And I always say move with purpose. And I talk about mapping your talk. Now, I'm going to talk about mapping in a couple of different contexts here, but in this particular context, I want to talk about mapping your talk to the stage. And so when I'm working with people and we have an opportunity to actually work around the stage, what I typically have them do is I will have them map a certain part of their talk to a certain part of the stage. And so what that means is maybe if we take a very simple speech structure, beginning, middle, and end, what I want to do is I want to start the beginning of my speech in a certain spot on the stage, and I'll deliver the beginning from the stage. And then as I move into the middle part and I figure out my segue, that's when I'm going to move across the stage. And I'm going to move with purpose, and I'm going to move to the next part of the stage, and I'm going to deliver the middle part of my talk. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come up with my segue into my end or my summary, and I'm going to move with purpose into that other part of the stage, and I'm going to deliver from there. And that helps me to do a couple of things. First of all, it helps me to make sure that I'm not delivering the whole thing stationary behind a lectern. But it also helps me to work through my talk within a space. And if I know when I'm standing on spot A, I'm going to be delivering section ABC. And when I'm standing on spot B, I'm going to deliver DEF. I'm going to deliver GHI from spot C. Then I know when I get to each of those spots that I've got a certain section to deliver, and then I can move on. And so it's going to help me figure out in my head and organize how I deliver my talk. The other thing is remember that it's your space, not just the stage, but the entire room. And sometimes depending on the room setup, sometimes I might like to walk down the middle of the aisle and give people a different perspective while I'm talking. And sometimes I might come down, close to the front row, and I might deliver a point or two to a specific person and then move on. And so as we're thinking about how we use the space, don't forget that yes, there is a stage and you should use the entire stage. But if there is opportunity to use more than the stage, be that speaker that uses the whole room, because the novelty of the fact that you're using the whole room will help people remember you much, much more. The next thing I talk about is visualize, don't memorize. So as we think about our thoughts and we think about how we get up and deliver our talk, I've worked with people that like to memorize their talk, every single word, every single punctuation mark, and they deliver to the letter each and every time. I've worked with some people that work that way, and if they happen to miss a line, miss a word, or forget something, it tends to throw them off for the rest of their talk, because the whole time they're thinking, oh, I should have said that other thing that I had written out. So when I'm working with clients, I typically will say, look, visualize, don't memorize your content. Because as you start to visualize your content and you start to create stories around your points, then your visualization is really just a conversation with your audience. Whereas if you're memorizing, you're more or less delivering a script. And as you're memorizing and you're delivering a script, it's much harder to be authentic in a script, because you are trying to hit your marks each and every time. Whereas if you visualize, I can deliver the same talk 25 times and I would deliver it 25 different ways. Because when I deliver a talk, I typically will have a concept in my head, and then I'll get up and I'll deliver a concept. This presentation, for instance, there is no script for this presentation, and the next time I deliver it will sound slightly different. And I might use different examples, and I might use different segues between slides, and I might do different things, because I tend to visualize my delivery rather than memorizing. The other thing that does is when I'm in a conversation with somebody and somebody might ask me a question, let's say after an event, or let's say I'm at an event attending as a guest, and somebody talks about, gosh, I really have trouble managing my nerves. Well, then I can talk about how I teach managing your nerves in the context of this presentation, because I visualize it. So I can tell you about distorting, deleting, and generalizing. And I can tell you about the filters that we use and how we build internal representations of external events and how that affects our bodies, and how that's, we tend to get nervous because we label it as being nervous, whereas the same physiology could be something different. And so by having those concepts and constructs visualized in my mind, I can drop them in whenever I need to. And then finally, let's talk about anchoring. Now, anchoring is a bit different to mapping, but very similar. And what I mean by that is, so I talked about mapping your talk, mapping certain sections to certain stages, to certain areas, etc. Anchoring is another technique to do that. Now, I say anchoring stories. So certainly, as you're thinking about the space that you're talking in, you can anchor a story. So for instance, if you would have seen me deliver this workshop live, I would have given you much more detail at the top when I was talking about what it was like to deliver my first presentation. And I would have moved around the room quite a lot. And as I was moving around the room, I would be anchoring different things. So I'd be anchoring my stories to certain spots. So I would start delivering when I was telling you that I was sitting in the front row and I wanted you to imagine something. I would deliver that from some spot. And then when I started to talk about how nervous I was, how I turned around and everybody was looking at me, I would have delivered that from a different spot. And then I would have talked about how I ran through the whole presentation when I back to the audience reading the PowerPoint. I would have delivered that to a different spot. And what I would have done is I would have used quite a few stories in quite a few different areas of the stage. Now, the other thing that would have done is it would have anchored your emotions to those spots. So, for instance, if I am standing to the right of the stage and I tell you how nervous I am, and I say, gosh, I could feel the butterflies in my stomach, and, I even start to physically look like I'm nervous, and you start to see that change in me. And then I move on from that. I go on with my speech. And maybe a little bit later, I tell you about a very successful presentation that I delivered. And when I'm telling you about that, my stance on the stage is different. You can see the confidence in me. You can see the things that I'm doing and how it's affected me. Then if I go back to where I started, if I walk back across the stage to where I told you about how I was nervous and anxious, without even opening my mouth, you'll start to feel nervous and anxious. Because our emotions, the audience's emotions, will be anchored to that spot where I demonstrated it. And then if I move back to the other place where I'm telling you about how successful I am, you'll start to feel a bit more pride, and you'll be with me a bit more happy. So we can anchor emotions along with our stories around the stage, and it's a very, very powerful technique. And if you can do that properly, then you will have your audience in the palm of your hand for your entire presentation. Again, we can anchor people's memories about different parts of the talks. We can anchor people's memories about what's going on in their head as you're delivering something. So what I like to say is effective storytelling and effective public speaking. You have to master the art of being artfully vague. And so what I mean by that is if I say, oh, can you remember the first time you ever went out on a date in a car? Can you remember that? And the first time, and you were there and you were all ready, and you were wearing that blue outfit, and your date came and they knocked on the door and you're really excited. And as you opened the door, you saw that they were, they're amazing. They're wearing that amazing red outfit, and they took you out and you got into their green Ford, and they took you to that Italian restaurant where you had lobster and you had spaghetti, and you had an amazing meal. And can you remember that? And the chances are you can't remember that, because that's not your story, because I've given you a lot of detail there. I've said, can you remember your blue outfit, their amazing red outfit, and the green Ford, and the Italian restaurant, and the lobster, and the spaghetti? And so I'm not being artfully vague there. I'm being very prescriptive. Whereas if I say, can you remember the first time you ever went out on a car date? Can you remember when you were waiting for your date to pick you up? Just close your eyes for a minute and just imagine you're back in that place. And can you remember the outfit you had on? Remember how you felt in that outfit? And as you open the door to your date, can you remember how they looked and what you thought when you first saw them? And can you remember what they said to you? And can you remember the conversation you had? And as you got in the car and, you started driving away and went through it, can you just remember how brilliant that experience was? And now, because I've been really vague there, you've decided what you were wearing. You've decided what your date was wearing. You've decided what kind of car it was. You've decided where you were going. I've made sure to say, can you remember how your date looked? Can you remember what they said to you? Can you remember how you felt? So again, I'm bringing in all of the different types of learners. I'm bringing all of the visual, kinesthetic, and auditory learners. And so by being vague and working around the stage, I can anchor your memories to different parts of the stage. But I have to make sure that I'm vague, and I have to make sure that the memories are yours and not memories that I'm trying to give you. It's the reason why people often say that if there's a book that they've read and the movie comes out later, they say, oh, the book was so much better. And the reason the book's better is because you make your own pictures in your mind of what's going on. Whereas if you're watching a movie, you're looking at the director's pictures. So very much the same. And then finally, on anchoring, I'll say just a little word about triggers here. Now you can also anchor all of these things, emotions, memories, that kind of thing, based on your body language. So you can anchor all of these things based on maybe a gesture you do with your hand, or the way you walk, or the way you stand, or something like that. And as you start to anchor all of these things in your audience will remember everything you've said, because all of a sudden it's not just a speech they're listening to, It's something they're experiencing. And then the G in stage stands for gaze. So oftentimes, we talk about eye contact, how long, how often, how many people do you look at? I actually went to a public speaking training one time where the presenter said the best thing you can do as a public speaker is find a couple of spots on the back wall, look over the heads of your audience at the back wall, and as long as you're looking at the back wall, everybody will think you're looking at them. And then you don't actually have to make eye contact with anybody. You don't have to get nervous. And that was actually a public speaking course that this particular presenter was charging people to go on. And the advice in that course just went downhill from there. So no, eye contact, eye contact is really, really important when we're delivering a talk. Eye contact is really important because that allows people to empathize with us. That allows us to really make a human connection. And so I talk about how long, how often, how many. I typically, when I'm delivering a speech, I'll deliver some information, make eye contact with somebody, and hold it almost until it's uncomfortable and then look away. Because you want them to really understand that the point you're making and the impact that you want to have is for them directly. And then move on to the next person. Again, the same thing. And hold your gaze and look around the room and make sure that you're always making eye contact with a variety of people. But don't do it, like it's a staring contest. You look at people and you don't blink for 5 minutes while you're delivering your talk because then, you look like a bit of a robot there. But as if you and I were having a one-to-one conversation and then somebody else came and joined us and there was 3 of us, how often would you look at the 2? How often would you change your focus and switch your gaze between me and the other person that walked up? And so as you're delivering a talk anywhere, your eye contact should be very natural, just like it would be in a conversation. And then the E, energy, and I'll just remind you of Rebecca winning her spelling bee. Remember, your energy is what people are going to pick up on. And if you turn up and your delivery is very monotone and just kind of, I've come here to give a speech today, and so what I want to talk about is this and that, and et cetera, et cetera. And if that's your energy level, that's going to be your crowd's energy level. And so the thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your crowd energy is as high as it possibly can be. Now, I have a demonstration that I do here when I'm doing this, one of these workshops live. And what I do is I have the whole audience stand up and I ask them to, okay, just take a second. And I want you to pretend like you're a bit depressed. Just pretend like you're depressed and pretend like you don't really want to be here and just pretend that, you haven't had a great day. And by this time, people's chins will have fallen. They'll start to slouch their shoulders. They'll start to adopt a very stressed and a very depressed position. And I won't let them do that for very long because I don't really want the energy to stay that way. I'll say, right, now, quickly, what I want you to do is I want you to stand up straight. I want you to be really, really proud. And I want you to pretend you're a superhero. And I want you to pretend that you're so excited to be here, that this is the most amazing thing you've ever seen in your life. And then all of a sudden the energy of the room lifts. And as the energy in the room lifts, you can see it's because I started talking faster, because I started to exhibit different posture myself. And I started to bring the audience's energy levels up. And so that's a great exercise to do with a crowd of people, because they will find very quickly how energies can rise and fall. And for a speaker in the front of the room, you'll find how quickly you can make the energy in a room rise and fall. In my career as a boxing ring announcer, my job was to bring the energy up. My job was to walk out in front of an audience, in front of a television camera, potentially in front of tens of thousands of people, and get all of those people cheering and excited about what they were about to see. Ladies and gentlemen, fighting out of the red corner. And all of a sudden the energy rises and everybody gets excited and everybody's cheering and they start singing. And then all of a sudden it's much more enjoyable for the audience because the energy level has risen. Now I say variety here because as again, and I'll come on to variety with our voice patterns in a moment, but the same way that we delete information, for instance, how the floor feels under our foot, how our left ear feels, any of those things, is because there's no change in that information. And so because there's no change in the information, again, it's not important to us. If all of a sudden the floor under our foot got really hot, then your attention would automatically go there because there's a change. And we call that novelty. And whenever there's any kind of novelty, our brains are drawn to it. And so much like, a lot of animals when they hunt, what they do is they stay very, very still, and they tend to kind of switch on their peripheral vision, so to speak. And as they switch on their peripheral vision and they're staying very, very still, they wait till they can sense the movement. And so, the cheetah in the long grass waiting for the movement of the rabbit that's 100 yards away. The reason he knows that is because it's novelty. The reason he knows that is because as he's holding very, very still, he can sense the movement because there's a change. So variety is really, really important. As a trainer, again, I teach other trainers how to get into this peripheral state, because as a trainer, if you're delivering your training from a peripheral state, you can find out how the energy is moving in the room because you can see the things that are different. And so as you start to see things that are different, your brain's drawn to them. So as a presenter up front, make sure that there's lots and lots of variety, not only in your voice, but maybe in your turn of phrase, maybe in your body language, maybe in the way you use the stage. That's the reason I say if you can use the whole space, get down off the stage, walk through the middle aisle, that variety, that novelty is going to create a focus on you. And then I say you should always check in on people about every 7 minutes. And I say, again, keeping in mind all the different learning styles every 7 minutes. Are you with me? Does that make sense? Great. Let's move on. You see a lot of motivational speakers using this, and they use this in a number of ways. A, to change the energy. B, to create novelty. And C, to create what they call a yes state, particularly if they're selling from stage. So every 7 minutes or so, I always check in with my audience. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Those sorts of things. Can you hear me in the back? Is that clear? Those sorts of terms. And then again, you're having another opportunity to build rapport with everybody with their learning styles. And then finally, we'll talk about presence of voice. So we've talked about all of the different presence. We've talked about presence of mind. We talked about presence of body. Now we're moving on to presence of voice. And within presence of voice, I've got another acronym for you. And I always teach my clients, learn to speak to the ears. And what I mean by that is we all have different voices within us. We all have different personalities. We all have different energy levels. Again, going back to how we change variety in the things that we talk. And so the E in ears stands for evangelist. And when I talk about evangelist, I mean like the typical American TV preacher evangelist. And the evangelist is really, really excited. And Rebecca was a bit of an evangelist when she was delivering her spelling bee. And that excitement will just go through your audience, and it'll flow through the whole room, and it will raise the energy. And the more excited you get, and the more you step into the evangelist, the more excited that your crowd is going to get. And if you learn how to deliver content in the voice of the evangelist, you will be a much more powerful public speaker. And so using that voice is really important because it punctuates the things that you want to say. And then the A in ears stands for architect. Now, the architect is very, very considerate about the things he says. The architect will typically deliver statistics, facts, figures, things of that nature. And the architect is the voice of authority. And if you learn how to use the voice of the architect, you will be a much more powerful public speaker. And so the architect is really important because it gives you a different angle on things. It gives you a way to punctuate slightly differently. And then the R in ears stands for the romantic. Now, the romantic often talks really soft and is really fond of pauses. Because a pause, when it's properly placed brings power. And if you can learn to use the voice of the romantic, you will be a much, much, much more powerful public speaker than you were before. And so again, the romantic is another variety that you can bring in. And it's a way to cause your audience to say, oh, hang on a minute. This must be really important. What's going on here? And then finally, the essence here's is the stooge. And the stooge is just, they're the kind of ones that sort of, make you laugh. And the stooges are the ones that they might make fun of themselves. They might say, oh, I'm fat and bald and here I am and whatever. And you won't believe what happened to me on the way here. And they might stumble over the stage. They just kind of deliver stuff, and they're really easy to listen to. But if you can learn, I promise, if you can learn the voice of the stooge and you can deliver the voice of the stooge on demand, you will be, believe it or not, you will be a much more powerful public speaker than you were before. And so using the stooge, again, is another way to bring variety, another way to just change it up, another way to keep your audience on their toes. And all of these voices tend to overlay what are called the Satir categories. And Satir categories, Virginia Satir was a therapist in the 70s, and she did quite a lot of interesting work in how to relate to people. And if you can take some of her work and you can overlay it on the way you deliver content and you present from stage, then you will become much, much more powerful. Again, the words here are pretty self-explanatory, but the leveler is somebody who is delivering with authority, and the leveler is much like the architect in that this is the way it is, and what I want to tell you is really important, and here are the facts to back it up. And then there's sort of the placater, and the placater just wants to get on with everybody and wants to make sure that nobody is really upset at any time, and everybody's having a great time. And then there's the blamer, and the blamer typically will talk down the end of their nose at you, and they'll point their finger at you, and the things that are happening here, and the reason that this audience isn't getting it is because they're not listening to me, and that's kind of the blamer. And then the distractor is much like the stooge, because the distractor might go from one topic to another, and they might try to move in a different direction. They might talk about something else, and they might come back, and then eventually they'll come around again, and then finally the thinker, which again is very much like the architect, maybe a bit like the romantic. The thinker likes pauses, and the thinker likes to deliver things in such a way to make them sound very, very provocative and very interesting to the audience. So I hope that has been really useful. That is P in power, presence. And I'm sure as a result of the things that we learned today, I'm sure as a result of the different areas that we covered, you will be a much different public speaker as a result of this webinar. So I will see you on the next one. Next one, we're going to cover the O in power, which stands for own it. I can't wait. Just get out there. Make sure to remember that anytime you are on stage facing an audience, that is your opportunity to make a dent in the world. It's your opportunity to affect your entire audience. So teach your audience how to think different. Teach your audience how to think better. Until next time, see you later.